May 14, 2022. 378 Oakwood Lane, Charleston, South Carolina. The quiet suburban neighborhood, bathed in the stillness of the night, was shattered by a blood-curdling reality. Inside 378 Oakwood Lane, a woman's life hung in the balance. Dee Blanchard, a mother of two, was locked in a desperate fight to survive. Her body was ravaged, stabbed multiple times, gunshots echoing through the rooms. Yet in the chaos of it all, Dee was still clinging to life. She crawled, leaving a trail of blood behind her as she desperately reached for the door, the hope of escape, of freedom, flickering in her eyes. Every inch she moved came with excruciating pain. Her body screamed in agony with every breath, but Dee refused to give up. Her hand reached out, fingers trembling as they touched the cool wooden doorframe. Just one more step. She tried to will herself to live, to make it out of the nightmare unfolding in her own home. But Jason Dupree was there, looming over her, his presence cold and deliberate. The man who once whispered, "I love you," in her ear was now the one who stood ready to take her life. The same man who had obsessed over her, controlled her, manipulated her, now the one who would end it all. This wasn't an act of passion, but something far more chilling. Jason's every move had been calculated, planned. The rage had been building inside him for months, and tonight he would make sure Dee never walked out of that house alive. Jason had not just snapped, he had carefully chosen this moment. Every wound, every strike, every second of Dee's suffering was part of his twisted design. He had orchestrated this crime with precision, ensuring that she couldn't escape the pain, couldn't escape him. She had no chance. Dee's heart pounded in her chest as her blood soaked the floor, her vision fading. But she didn't stop fighting. She couldn't stop. She had no choice. As her body betrayed her, the door seemed just out of reach. But it wouldn't matter. Jason's plan was already in motion, and he had made sure that she wouldn't survive. You're watching Bruised Voice. Hit the like button if you haven't already, because with every like you're helping give justice to those who can't speak for themselves anymore. But think about this, how well do you know the person you trust most? Could the one you love, the one you think would never hurt you, suddenly change? Could someone who once swore to protect you, to love you forever, become your worst nightmare? When your partner says they'll die for you, could they also be the one to end your life? What if love, real, dangerous love, was nothing more than a trap, a deadly game that you never saw coming? Dee Blanchard's life was built on a facade that no one questioned, at least not until it was too late. Born in the late 1970s, Dee's early years were marked by hardship and loss. Orphaned at a young age, she was thrust into a world where survival was everything. Growing up, she learned that relationships, especially family bonds, were often strained, and that love was something that could be bought, manipulated, and controlled. It wasn't just a basic need, but a weapon. Her relationship with Jason Dupree wasn't her first, but it would be her last. By all outward appearances, they seemed to be just another couple in the neighborhood. Normal, happy, even a little bit mundane. But Jason's flaws ran deep. On the surface, he was the loving boyfriend who promised to take care of Dee and her daughter, Gypsy Rose. But behind closed doors, Jason was a man who couldn't hold down a steady job, whose constant issues with anger, jealousy, and his inability to meet life's challenges made him a burden to those around him. He wasn't just an average guy with struggles, he was a man who lacked the very qualities that should have made him worthy of a healthy, thriving relationship. His jealousy wasn't just a passing emotion, it was a suffocating, possessive force. He wanted to control everything, including Dee. And like many women before her, Dee overlooked those warning signs. She brushed off his unpredictable behavior, thinking it was just a phase. The red flags became invisible to her, as they often do to many people caught in the cycle of a toxic relationship. Jason's resentment toward Dee was just as prominent as his jealousy. He saw her as the one in control, the one who had it all together. In reality, Dee had her own set of insecurities, having been molded by a childhood that left her with scars of her own. She clung to relationships that gave her a sense of power, but this sense of control over her life was slowly eaten away by the inadequacies of the man she chose to be with. Jason was neither strong nor independent, traits that Dee thought she needed in a partner. Instead, he was weak in every sense of the word. He couldn't provide for himself and had multiple failed relationships in his past. The warning signs were there: his unresolved issues with authority, his paranoia over Dee's relationships with others, and the constant need for reassurance. But Dee, as many do, ignored the signs, telling herself that it was just a phase. In society, this behavior often goes unnoticed. Many women find themselves in relationships where a man's inability to thrive on his own is overlooked. Society dismisses it as just a bad day, or just a rough patch. Women like Dee Dee, who had already endured so much in life, often settle for less than they deserve because they're afraid of being alone, of being judged for walking away. They convince themselves that they can fix the person they're with, that love will somehow save them. Jason's jealousy and his incompetence as a partner were always present. Dee Dee had just gotten used to them. She became blind to the way he undermined her, broke her down, and ultimately, smothered her spirit. The world outside Dee Dee and Jason's relationship might have seen them as a normal couple, but inside, it was a different story. Dee Dee had grown tired of the games, but she never saw the danger that came from Jason's slowly escalating need for control. His obsession with her love, his anger over her independence, and his intense jealousy all simmered beneath the surface. Jason Dupree's thoughts moved with precision. He had prepared for this moment for months, each night filled with a quiet satisfaction as he imagined the blood, the fear, the power he would feel in the final moments of Dee Dee's life. It wasn't just the rage of betrayal that burned inside him, it was the calculated joy of watching someone so fragile, so once perfect, crumble beneath his power. There was grace in his execution, a stillness that even now, as he raised the knife, felt almost ceremonious. The room was dark, illuminated by a faint moonlight that barely lit the edges of Dee Dee's face. Her desperation was almost too much for him to enjoy at first. The way she looked at him, pleading with those fearful eyes, that brief flicker of hope she had, like she still thought there was a chance for her to survive, was cute but unnecessary. He had already decided, long before tonight, how this would go down. Dee Dee's life had no meaning in his world anymore. It was her refusal to be controlled, her insistence on freedom, that made her expendable. So many nights he had imagined this. Her body on the floor, blood pooling beneath her, her movements slowing, her energy draining out like the last life in a dying animal. Jason's hand gripped the knife tightly. This wasn't an act of anger, it was an art, a performance. Each stab was calculated, precise, each movement rehearsed in his mind 1,000 times. The sharp, metallic sound of the blade entering her body made him smile. It wasn't about the pain he inflicted, it was about the finality, the power. He could feel it in his veins, the rush of control as Dee Dee's body tried to fight, tried to hang on for just a few more seconds of life. But her blood was already mixing with the cold floor, her cries growing weaker with every breath. He had no fear, no remorse. It was almost beautiful, the moment her body accepted the fact that she would not survive. Dee Dee's hands reached for the door, but there was no escape. He had already won. The thought of her crawling toward a freedom that would never come thrilled him. He watched with cold fascination as her fingers slid across the floor, desperate, desperate for that last breath of hope. But she wouldn't get it. Not from him. She had no power left. His mind wasn't clouded by any moral hesitation, no guilt, no fleeting thought of regret. Jason had been preparing for this his whole life. Every little frustration, every moment of rejection, every instance where he felt small, insignificant, had led to this final act of grace. She had given him everything he needed. She had allowed him to take control. And now she was nothing more than an object, a body to be discarded, a mark of his perfection. The thought that anyone, anything, could have stood between him and this moment was laughable. There was only him. Only his will. Jason took his time, enjoying the final moments as Dee Dee gasped. Her breath slowing, like a countdown clock, the minutes ticking away, the light in her eyes fading into the darkness of submission. This wasn't just murder, it was his triumph. Dee Dee's life, reduced to this grotesque ending, was proof of his superiority. Jason stood over her, breathing heavily but composed, watching the life drain from Dee Dee's eyes. There was something almost peaceful about it now, like watching a broken clock slowly stop ticking. Dee Dee's body had stopped struggling, but the fight in her face, the look of disbelief, those were things Jason would never forget. She had thought, even in her final moments, that she could survive. That somehow, something inside her would keep her alive long enough to escape. But it was too late. He could see the life in her eyes dimming, her strength ebbing away like a candle blown out by the wind. Her hand was still outstretched, almost in a mockery of defiance. There was no love in that hand reaching for the door, no plea for mercy, just desperation. Jason took a moment to look down at her, savoring the stillness, the silence that filled the room, the air thick with the weight of what had just happened. And then, as if it had been part of the plan all along, Jason let out a slow exhale, his grip loosening. For a moment he felt the glorious satisfaction of control, of knowing he had done something no one could undo. But as Jason stepped away, something stirred. A faint noise. It was the sound of Dee Dee's breath, shallow, gasping as if trying to cling to life for just a moment longer. For a second Jason thought she might speak. Perhaps one last plea, one final cry for help. But instead she uttered nothing. The silence filled the room, and in that silence Jason knew one thing. She was done. In the distance he could hear the soft sound of sirens growing louder, but they didn't concern him. His mind was already somewhere else, already anticipating the aftermath, the next steps, the inevitable chase that would follow. But for now there was only her. The first few hours were spent in a haze. Jason knew the authorities would soon arrive, but in that moment he didn't care. He had taken everything from her life, her sense of control, her freedom, and now it was time to cover his tracks. The rush of power, the euphoria of having finally dominated her, filled his mind as he moved about the house. The blood stains, the chaos, the moments of desperation he had seen in her eyes, it was all evidence of what had happened, but Jason didn't care. He didn't think about the police, about the consequences. His mind was set. Dee Dee had played her part, she had been the catalyst, the one who had pushed him to this point, and now she was the final piece of the puzzle. Jason left the house, but there was no need for him to hurry. The police would eventually find him. The blood would lead them to him, yes, but it didn't matter. He had already done what he needed to do. Dee Dee was gone, and that was all that mattered. The public reaction was swift. The small neighborhood in Charleston that had once admired Dee Dee Blanchard's strength and resilience now stood stunned, questioning how something so dark and terrifying could have happened in their midst. Jason's calm demeanor and cold indifference, his ability to walk away from the scene without so much as a tremor of doubt, sent a ripple through the community. How could they have missed it? How could they have not seen the signs? The investigation took several unexpected turns. It didn't take long for the police to uncover the depth of Jason's obsession. The blood was still fresh on the floor when they found his phone. Messages between him and Dee Dee, all revealing just how far Jason had fallen into his own web of obsession and control. Jason Dupree's arrest was uneventful in its coldness. No dramatic standoff, no tearful confession. When the police arrived at his apartment, Jason was sitting calmly on the couch as if he were waiting for them. He had no remorse, no fear in his eyes, just the unmistakable expression of someone who had already come to terms with what he had done. As the officers approached, he didn't flinch or make any attempt to flee. There was no rush to conceal anything, no frantic attempts to cover up what had already been accomplished. It was almost as if he had been anticipating this moment for years, as though he had been planning for the inevitable moment when his crimes would catch up to him. As they read him his rights, Jason's lips twitched just for a moment. It wasn't regret, it was satisfaction, a silent victory in his mind. The adrenaline, the elation of finally taking control, of turning his obsessive thoughts into reality, was too much to suppress. Jason's calm demeanor during the arrest was unsettling to those who witnessed it. There was a sense of pride in him, like he had just completed an artwork that only he could fully understand. The fact that he was being led away, the world now fully aware of his actions, didn't bother him. For him, the real satisfaction was in the act itself, and the aftermath was nothing more than the world catching up to him. The community's reaction to Jason's arrest was one of shock and disbelief. How could someone who seemed so normal, someone who had spent years blending in, be capable of such a brutal, calculated act? Jason had been seen as a quiet man, a partner who, on the surface, had always appeared to be the perfect fit for Dee Dee. They had never suspected that the monster was lying in wait beneath his calm exterior. People in the neighborhood, who had known Dee Dee and Jason, expressed confusion and fear. How could it have come to this? A quiet man, a couple with such an outwardly normal life, reduced to the depths of murder. The tragedy struck at the heart of the neighborhood, as Dee Dee had been beloved, and Jason, now the murderer, was a man whose outward calm had hid his chaos. It was hard to reconcile this image of Jason as a loving partner with the man who had taken Dee Dee's life without a second thought. Sympathy for Dee Dee ran deep, but the community could not escape the chilling questions surrounding Jason. How had they missed the signs? What had led him to this point? What were the deeper issues that had festered beneath the surface? In their eyes, Jason had always been someone who seemed harmless. But this murder, this calculated act of violence, was proof that the devil was in the details, and those details were never as innocent as they seemed. As Jason stood trial, it was clear that the case wasn't about whether he had committed the crime. He had openly admitted it. The courtroom drama centered around his defense, his motives, and his psychological state. Jason's defense lawyer, knowing the coldness of his actions, tried to argue that Jason was driven by Dee Dee's manipulations, painting her as the true aggressor in their toxic relationship. But the more the defense delved into the details of the crime, the clearer it became that Jason was not the victim. He was the calculating aggressor. Jason, sitting in the defendant's chair, had the presence of someone who had already won the battle in his mind. His stoic expression revealed that he was untouched by the proceedings, like a man who had nothing to prove. He listened carefully, occasionally offering a faint smile as the testimony unfolded. When the question of his motivations came up, he didn't flinch. He knew exactly what he was doing and he felt entitled to explain it. When asked about the brutality of his actions, Jason's response was chilling. He claimed that he had only done what was necessary, presenting his crime as a result of DD's emotional neglect and control over him. There was no guilt in his voice. No remorse. In fact, he almost seemed proud of what he had done, as if in his mind, he had simply ended a chapter that was no longer serving him. The idea of remorse was foreign to him. It was all about vindication, about finally having control over his life. It was clear to everyone present that Jason was not just a killer, he was someone who had taken life for the thrill of it, to prove that he was capable of wielding power over another human being. His calmness in the face of such brutality made him even more terrifying. This wasn't a case of a man snapping under pressure. This was the case of someone who had carefully orchestrated every moment. Jason Dupree had planned it all, and he had taken a sick delight in executing his plan. The final verdict came down swiftly. Jason Dupree was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was heavy with relief, but the weight of the chilling realization hung over everyone like a fog. Jason Dupree wasn't just a man who had murdered his partner. He was a man who had calculated every action, who had taken someone's life with deliberate grace. As he was led away, there was a strange sense of quiet among those in the room. This wasn't a man who was broken by his actions. This wasn't a man who would reflect on what he had done. For Jason, this was simply the next step in his life. Jason Dupree sits behind bars, his once calm demeanor now replaced with a quiet acceptance of his fate. No remorse, no reflection. His life, forever tied to the brutality of that night, continues in solitude. As for DD's family, they mourn her loss, but it's a mourning that's impossible to shake. They've lost a mother, a sister, a friend, and there's no replacing her. It could have been avoided. Maybe. But it's too late. Could the signs have been caught earlier? Was this just a twisted act of a man desperate to feel control, or had DD's actions pushed him too far? It's a question we'll never have a clear answer to. But it doesn't change the outcome. The damage was done. The world reacts, but does it matter? The media painted Jason as the cold, calculating man he is. Some still see Gypsy as a victim, others as a willing participant. The questions of control, manipulation, and trust will linger long after the case fades from the headlines. But one thing is certain. This tragedy could have been avoided. Yet here we are left with the haunting. If you haven't subscribed yet, you may never hear this voice again. And what good is a voice that speaks for the forever silenced victims if you're not willing to give it the attention it deserves? Hit that subscribe button now and stay with Bruised Voice for more stories that demand to be heard.